So imagine a therapist looking at a couple, right? Like a couple who constantly screams at each other
Mm,
and giving them this official homework assignment. The therapist says, I want you to go home, sit in your living room, and intentionally scream at each other for exactly 15 minutes every Tuesday.
yeah, which sounds like absolutely terrible advice on the surface.
Right. I mean, why would a mental health professional tell you to go start a fight? It makes no sense. But it turns out this is actually a highly effective psychological intervention.
It really is. And, I think it perfectly illustrates just how vast the landscape of modern therapy actually is. Because I think a lot of people still have this lingering pop culture image of counseling.
Oh, like lying on a leather couch.
Exactly. You're staring at the ceiling, analyzing a dream you had about a talking fish, while someone with a notepad just nods thoughtfully.
Right, the classic Freudian setup.
Yeah. But the reality is that the couch and the dream analysis are just one tiny sliver of a much larger psychological toolkit.
Which is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a comprehensive framework from our source material that breaks down the 5 major theoretical orientations of therapy.
That's right.
We're looking at the behavioral, cognitive, systemic, brief, and crisis approaches. So we're basically going to start by looking at how to fix our outward actions, then move inward to rewire our thoughts, zoom out to see how our families mess us up, explore some quick fix hacks, and finally look at what happens when a full-blown emergency hits.
It's a journey. And the main takeaway here isn't that one of these is the right way to do therapy. It's that human struggles are incredibly diverse, and no single theory is like a magic bullet.
Which is such a powerful concept even if you never set foot in a therapist's office. Understanding these different lenses gives you a completely different way to decode your own behavior.
Oh, totally.
And honestly, the behavior of everyone you interact with. So let's start with the most outward-facing approach. The one that essentially says, I don't care about your deep-seated childhood trauma. I just care about what you are doing right now.
Right, so that would be behavioral counseling. And this traces its roots back to famous psychological pioneers, people like B.F. Skinner and Ivan Pavlov.
The bell and the dogs, right?
Exactly. And the core belief of behaviorism was actually quite radical when it emerged because it completely bypassed the unconscious mind.
Wow.
Yeah, behaviorists focus almost entirely on modifying observable actions. Their fundamental premise is just that all behavior is learned.
Okay.
And because it's learned, it can be unlearned through reinforcements and punishments.
There's a classic scenario often used to teach this from the chapter involving a 5th grade teacher named Bill.
Oh, Bill is a great example.
Yeah, Bill essentially turns his classroom into this hardcore behaviorist experiment because he realizes he can't sit down and psychoanalyze 10-year-olds to figure out why they're acting out.
No, of course not. You'd never get anything done.
Exactly. So he just stops trying to do that. Instead, he strictly applies behavioral theories. He implements a system where he heavily rewards his students with positive reinforcement for very specific actions.
Like promptness, I think.
Right, promptness or using proper table manners in the lunchroom, just tangible things.
And the results in cases like Bill's are almost always striking. He ends up with a highly orderly classroom, achievement goes up, and behavioral complaints drop to practically zero.
That's amazing.
Yeah, because Bill didn't need to know why a student was acting out. He just needed to change the environmental rewards. He made it so that acting out was no longer beneficial, while behaving well resulted in an immediate, tangible payoff.
See, I hear that and immediately think, okay, this is basically just training a puppy.
That is a very common comparison.
Or maybe like leveling up in a video game,
Yeah.
You do the right actions, you get the XP, you hear the little ding sound, and you do it again. But I have to push back on this a bit for you.
Sure.
Isn't this just bribery? Like, does this actually change who a person is on the inside or just their outward actions? If I only have good table manners because I want a reward from my teacher, am I actually a polite person or just a really well-trained opportunist?
That is the exact critique leveled against behaviorism. And frankly, behaviorists freely admit this limitation.
They just own it.
Pretty much. This approach does not deal with the quote-unquote total person. It completely ignores past history, unconscious forces, and sometimes even the underlying emotional pain. It literally just fixes the symptoms.
Just the symptoms.
Right. But we have to remember, sometimes the symptom is the emergency. If a symptom is actively ruining your life, like a severe phobia, fixing that outward action is incredibly valuable, even if you don't resolve the deep-seated origin.
Okay, but how does that actually work in practice? Like, if I'm terrified of flying or I'm terrified of spiders, You can't just give me a piece of candy when I look at a spider to make me not terrified.
No, true. Bribery doesn't cure a phobia, but systematic desensitization does.
Ooh, what's that?
Well, let's look at a common case study from the text of a client, we'll call him Joe, who suffers from severe paralyzing anxiety.
Okay.
The first step a behaviorist takes is having Joe create an anxiety hierarchy. Joe literally ranks his life events from 0 to 100 based on how much anxiety they cause.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So a 10 for Joe might be going to sleep. A 50 is his personal finances. And 85 is talking to his mother.
Relatable.
Right. And his absolute maximum, a 90, is his marriage relationship.
Oh, man. That is a brutal list to have to write out.
It is. But once they have the list, the real mechanical work begins. The counselor spends sessions just teaching Joe deep physiological relaxation techniques. Breathing, muscle relaxation, grounding.
So not even dealing with the fears yet.
Exactly. Then, once Joe is in a state of profound physical relaxation, they slowly introduce the lowest item on the list. They have him think about going to sleep.
And if his heart rate spikes, they stop.
Exactly. They pause, they guide him back to baseline. If he can stay calm while thinking about sleep, they move up to finances. They are relying on a biological mechanism called reciprocal inhibition. Your nervous system literally cannot be in a state of deep muscular relaxation and high panic at the exact same time.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, by repeatedly pairing the anxiety-producing thought with a physical state of relaxation, the brain literally unlearns the fear response. It's pure mechanics.
Okay, I mean, that makes total sense, especially for specific phobias. But it also highlights a massive blind spot in the behavioral approach.
Which is?
Well, behaviorism works great when the problem is an action or a biological fear response. But what happens when the problem isn't what you are doing, but what you are thinking?
Yes.
Because Joe's anxiety about his marriage isn't just an action. It's a whole complex web of thoughts and assumptions and internal monologues.
And that limitation is exactly what birthed the cognitive and cognitive behavioral approaches. Under this umbrella, you have theories like rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT, developed by Albert Ellis,
Right.
and cognitive therapy by Aaron Beck. To really wrap your head around cognitive therapy, you have to accept a massive paradigm shift. They argue that events do not cause our problems.
Wait, events don't cause our problem.
Yeah. No, our irrational thoughts about those events cause our problems.
Okay, there's a great example of this from the text involving a college student named Dolores.
Oh, the party example.
Yeah. So Dolores goes to a sorority party, has way too much to drink, gets noticeably drunk, and the president of the sorority pulls her aside and severely scolds her in front of people. Now, that is the objective event.
Right. And according to cognitive theory, that event, the actual scolding, does not cause Dolores's depression or anxiety the next morning. It's the internal monologue Dolores has about the event.
So it's what she tells herself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She could engage in negative, irrational self-talk, telling herself, you know, I am a terrible, stupid person. I'm a complete failure. Everyone in this house hates me, and I'm going to be kicked out.
Which feels awful.
Exactly. Or she could use rational self-talk. I made a mistake, I drank too much, and I got in trouble. But I am a fallible human being, and one mistake doesn't make me a worthless person.
There's another classic scenario about a guy named Phil that really hit home for me, actually.
Poor Phil.
Poor Phil. So he misses a crucial shot in a basketball game, and later that week, he writes an essay for English class that gets a mediocre grade. Two totally normal, mildly disappointing life events.
Yeah, happens to everyone.
But Phil's brain immediately labels him a loser with a capital L. He decides he's completely unattractive, useless, and that he should literally never speak up in class or on the court again.
Yeah, Phil is doing two very common things there.
Yeah.
Catastrophizing and overgeneralizing. He's taking isolated incidents and turning them into a permanent identity.
Right.
The goal of a cognitive therapist is to catch those thoughts, what Beck called automatic thoughts, and dispute them using hard logic and evidence. They essentially put the client's internal monologue on trial.
I love the analogy of cognitive distortions being like wearing heavily tinted glasses. Like, if your lenses are smeared with loser thoughts, every normal, neutral event looks like a disaster.
Exactly.
A friend doesn't text you back immediately. It's not because they're busy. Through those tinted glasses, it's undeniable proof they hate you.
Yes, that's exactly how it works.
But here is where I have to challenge this whole concept. Dolores actually did mess up at the party.
She did.
She broke the rules. She embarrassed herself. Isn't reframing your thoughts just a convenient way to avoid taking responsibility for bad behavior? Like, Oh, I'm not irresponsible. I'm just a fallible human.
You know, that's a really sharp observation, and it's a trap a lot of people fall into when they misunderstand cognitive therapy. It's why reality therapy, developed by William Glasser, is often grouped with these approaches.
Okay, reality therapy.
Yeah, reality therapy is the exact opposite of avoiding responsibility. It focuses intensely on personal choice. Glasser argued that all human behavior is a direct attempt to satisfy five basic needs: survival, belonging, power, freedom, and fun.
So every single thing we do boils down to trying to get one of those five things.
According to this model, yes. So a reality therapist wouldn't let Dolores off the hook with a simple reframe. They would sit down and ask her, when you decided to drink too much, what need were you trying to meet?
Oh, wow.
Were you looking for belonging with the group? Were you looking for fun?
And then they evaluate if it actually worked.
Exactly. The therapist asks the ultimate pragmatic question: is this current behavior actually getting you what you
Definitely
want?
it's not.
Right. If getting drunk got Dolores scolded and alienated from the sorority president, it absolutely failed to meet her need for belonging. So she has to take responsibility for that failure and choose a different, more effective action next time.
Okay, so cognitive and reality therapies fix the internal thought process, and behaviorism fixes the outward action.
Yes.
But both of those still have a glaring blind spot. They treat the individual person like they exist in a vacuum. Like it's just you, your brain, and your choices against the world.
Which isn't true.
Right. Because humans don't live in a vacuum. We are embedded in environments, workplaces, and families.
We are deeply embedded. And that brings us to a fundamentally different lens: systems theories. This includes frameworks like Bowen family systems, structural family therapy, and strategic counseling.
Okay.
And if there is one massive takeaway from this entire approach, it's this. In systems theory, the individual is never the problem.
Wow.
The system is the problem.
Which honestly sounds like such a relief. Finally, a psychological theory that lets me say, it's not me, it's my family.
Well, it's not quite a free pass to blame your parents for everything, but it means you are part of an interconnected web. To understand this, you have to grasp the shift from linear causality to circular causality.
How does that work?
Well, linear causality is simple. A causes B. I push a glass off the table, it breaks. But human systems operate in loops. A causes B, which causes C, which feeds back and causes A to happen again.
This actually makes so much sense when you apply it to everyday life, like workplace dynamics.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about an office where a manager constantly micromanages an employee. The linear view says, oh, the manager is a control freak. That's the problem.
Right.
But the circular view looks closer. The manager micromanages because the employee is disengaged. But why is the employee disengaged? Because the manager micromanages them. The actions constantly reinforce each other in a closed loop.
Precisely. And in families, these loops get incredibly complex. It's often compared to a mobile hanging over a baby's crib.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, all those little wooden animals are perfectly balanced. You can't reach up and pull on the wooden elephant without the giraffe and the monkey violently wobbling. The whole structure shifts to accommodate the tension.
Yeah.
There is a concept from Bowen theory called triangulation that perfectly describes how families handle that wobble.
How does triangulation work in practice?
Imagine a married couple experiencing severe unspoken tension. They're anxious, they're drifting apart. Instead of dealing with the tension directly between the two of them, they subconsciously pull in a third party, almost always a child, to absorb the stress.
That sounds intense.
It is. The parents might start hyper-focusing on the child's grades, or the child might suddenly develop severe behavioral problems, or even a somatic illness like chronic stomach aches.
Because the child unconsciously realizes, if I'm sick or if I'm failing math, my parents stop fighting with each other and focus all their energy on me.
Exactly. The child's quote-unquote problem is actually stabilizing the parent's marriage. If a therapist only treats the child's stomach aches or anxiety using, say, cognitive therapy, they are entirely missing the point.
Because they're just treating the symptom of the system.
Right. The child isn't broken. The child's anxiety is serving a vital function in keeping the family system from collapsing.
That is wild. And it requires a completely different type of intervention.
Which brings us back to that crazy hook at the beginning of the deep dive. This systems approach leads to some incredibly unusual treatment methods, especially in strategic counseling.
Yes, the screaming homework.
Right. Telling a family to go home and intentionally scream at each other. How does intentionally causing chaos disrupt a systemic loop? It's a brilliant technique known as prescribing the symptom. Here's the mechanics of why it works.
Mhm.
When a family is stuck in one of those dysfunctional circular loops, they feel completely helpless.
Like they're trapped.
Yeah, they will sit on the couch and say, "We can't help it. The arguments just happen to us. We always end up screaming."
Right, they feel like victims of their own dynamic. The fight is a weather event that just rolls in.
Exactly. So the counselor says, "Okay, every Tuesday at 7 p.m., I want you to sit in the living room and scream at each other for exactly 15 minutes."
That is just so counterintuitive.
It is, but by forcing them to fight voluntarily, the counselor creates a massive psychological paradox. If the family actually goes home and does it, they are proving to themselves that they have total control over when they fight.
Wow.
They are starting the fight on command, and the realization is immediate: if we can start it on command.
We can stop it on command. They realize it's a choice, not an inevitability. That is Jedi mind trick level therapy right there.
It really is.
Yeah.
And strategic therapy is known for being relatively brief, often aiming to disrupt the pattern and get the family out of therapy in around 10 sessions.
Which serves as the perfect transition. Because mapping out family systems and setting up paradoxes still takes time. What if you don't care why the engine is making a weird noise or how the parts connect, and you just want the car to drive right now?
That brings us to brief counseling.
Yes.
Brief counseling encompasses approaches like solution-focused and narrative counseling. And they are radical in their sheer simplicity. They essentially throw out the past entirely.
Just throw it out.
Completely. They do not care about your childhood trauma, your irrational thoughts, or your family's triangulation. They focus 100% on present strengths and future possibilities.
It's like the ultimate psychological life hack. Just find what's working and do more of it. There is a famous technique in solution-focused counseling called the miracle question that illustrates this perfectly.
Oh, that's a classic.
A client comes in with a massive problem, and instead of analyzing it, the counselor asks, if a miracle happened tonight while you were sleeping and your problem was completely solved, how would you know?
Right. What would be the very first thing you notice different tomorrow morning?
The mechanics of that question are profound, actually, because when you ask someone about their problem, their brain zeroes in on the obstacle.
Naturally.
But when you ask the miracle question, you force their brain to vividly visualize a future state without the obstacle. Once the client describes what that miracle morning looks like, the counselor pivots to finding exceptions.
Tell me about a time in the last month when a tiny piece of that miracle was already happening. When was the problem not there?
Exactly. You find that tiny exception, dissect what made it possible, and try to replicate it. But there is a hilarious and, well, kind of sad case study from the chapter about when this goes terribly wrong.
Oh, you mean Saul?
Yes, Saul. So there's this guy named Saul, a continuing education student who learns about solution-focused therapy. He loves the philosophy. He thinks, great, I'll just focus on the positive exceptions.
Right.
But then he tries to apply it to his own lifelong habit of constantly running away from his problems.
And he hits a massive wall.
A brick wall.
Wow.
When Saul is asked to identify the exceptions to his behavior, like times when he faced a problem head-on instead of running away, he comes up completely empty.
Just nothing.
Nothing. Everyone involved realizes there were no exceptions. He literally always ran away. He had zero foundation to build on.
Which perfectly highlights the very real limitations of brief counseling.
I'm glad we brought that up because I have a big pushback here. This sounds incredibly appealing for a listener who is busy and just wants quick results. Like, who wouldn't want a quick fix?
Sure.
But isn't it kind of dangerous? If you just focus on positive exceptions and explicitly ignore the past, aren't you just slapping a Band-Aid on a bullet wound? Like, what about deep unhealed trauma?
You've hit the nail on the head, and ethical counselors are very aware of this limitation. Solution-focused therapy relies on a highly motivated client dealing with a relatively manageable, everyday problem.
Okay, so everyday stuff.
Yes. It is absolutely not designed for treating major mental health disorders like schizophrenia, and it is not a substitute for processing profound grief, abuse, or severe trauma.
That makes sense.
It's often described as a skeleton key. It can unlock a whole lot of everyday doors, but it is not going to open a bank vault.
Before we move on, I do want to mention narrative counseling, which falls in this same brief category. They use a concept called externalizing the problem, which is brilliant.
It's a great concept.
The idea is that the person is never the problem. The problem is the problem. You aren't an angry person. You are a person currently dealing with anger as an outside force that is trying to ruin your day.
It completely removes the shame. If you aren't the problem, you and the counselor can sit on the same side of the table and team up to fight the problem together.
But what happens when the problem isn't just a habit or a thought or a family dynamic? Brief therapy assumes you have a baseline to return to. What happens when the ground is literally fallen out from under you and your baseline is gone?
When an actual emergency is happening.
Right, when life hacks fail.
Oh.
That brings us to crisis counseling.
This is a fundamentally different type of psychological intervention. A crisis is defined as an event or situation that makes a person feel so completely overwhelmed that they are unable to cope using their normal resources.
So their usual tools just don't work.
Exactly. Whatever tools they normally use to handle stress, whether that's deep breathing or calling a friend, just snap under the weight of the event.
The literature breaks this down into 4 specific types of crises, which shows just how broad an emergency can be.
Right.
You have developmental crises. These are normal, anticipated life stages that just hit you harder than expected, like retiring and suddenly feeling a crushing loss of identity. Then there are situational crises, sudden, unexpected events, like a terrible car accident, a sudden death, or losing your job out of nowhere.
You also have existential crises, which many people associate with a classic midlife crisis, the sudden, paralyzing realization of a lack of purpose, or feeling like your life has no meaning.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
And finally, ecosystemic crises. These are massive external events that affect entire communities in natural disaster like a hurricane or a devastating act of terrorism.
So unlike all the other therapies we've talked about where the counselor is essentially a guide sitting in the passenger seat asking you where you want to drive, crisis counseling changes the dynamic entirely. In a crisis, the counselor grabs the steering wheel so you don't drive off a cliff. It's psychological triage.
That steering wheel analogy is perfect. Crisis counseling is highly directive. A person in an active crisis often cannot think logically. Their prefrontal cortex is offline and their brain is in pure survival mode.
So they literally can't process things normally.
Right. The counselor steps in and takes control. They absolutely do not ask about your childhood or your irrational thoughts. First, they ensure immediate physical and psychological safety.
Okay.
Then they quickly assess the situation, and they essentially force the client to commit to a highly concrete action plan for the next 24 hours. They will literally ask, "Where are you sleeping tonight? Who are you calling right now?"
Psychologists often use a specific tool for this called CISD, Critical Incident Stress Debriefing, right?
Yes.
It's a highly structured intervention done within hours or days of a traumatic event, often in groups, to help stabilize people. And the goal of CISD isn't to cure their lifelong neuroses or figure out their family dynamics.
No, not at all.
The goal is simply to stop the emotional bleeding, get the client back to their pre-crisis baseline so they can remember how to breathe again.
Exactly. The timeline is vastly different. While psychoanalysis might take years and strategic therapy takes weeks, crisis counseling is immediate and very short term.
Just triage.
Right. Once the client is stabilized and safe, then they can be referred to one of the other theoretical approaches we've discussed for the deeper, longer-term healing.
We have covered incredible ground today. We've seen how behaviorism reshapes our outward actions by changing the rewards. We've explored how cognitive and reality therapy teach us to catch our self-defeating thoughts and evaluate our choices. We zoomed out to untangle the invisible circular loops of our family systems.
Yeah.
We learned how to use brief counseling to find exceptions and externalize our problems. And finally, we saw how crisis counseling provides emotional triage when everything falls apart.
And if there is a common thread running through all of this, it's that human complexity requires a diverse toolkit. A skilled counselor, or just a deeply self-aware person, doesn't force every problem into a single theoretical box.
They adapt.
Exactly. You assess a situation, and you choose the tool that fits the moment.
I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over. We've seen so many valid ways to view human struggle today. Think about your own life. Which lens do you default to when you hit a wall?
That's a great question.
When something goes wrong at work or in a relationship, do you instantly try to fix your habits and actions? Do you beat yourself up with negative automatic thoughts? Or do you immediately look around and blame your systemic environment?
We all have a default.
We do. And the next time you find yourself stuck on a problem and your usual reaction isn't working, maybe the solution isn't to try harder. Maybe the solution is simply to borrow a completely different theory's lens. Look at the menu, pick a different strategy, and see if the world looks a little clearer. Thanks for joining us, and keep diving deep into your own mind.